Dove Men Plus Care. Smoother, healthier.
Peace, family. Y'all know who it is. It's Bakari Lumumba, back once again, the progenitor of LumumbaSpeaks.com, a Black empowerment initiative where we believe we could gain a competitive advantage by always betting on Black. We're back Sunday morning. We're going to have a robust conversation regarding, is toxic masculinity real? Right? But before you do that, make sure you go to LumumbaSpeaks.com, Black Empowerment Initiative. We have a new workshop that we've put together, particularly in light of the situation that we see with Kyrie Irving. There's been a robust conversation that's taken place, not only in the community, but also on social media regarding what Black people can do to push back against these type of issues. And I put together this workshop entitled 4 Steps to Power, right? So really going to be looking at taking a proactive approach, a top-down approach to gaining power, and of course, addressing many of the issues that we find in our community. But with that being said, got to go over some ground rules before we have this robust conversation on, is toxic masculinity real? Make sure you tap in. I want some sisters to tap in, especially be part of this conversation. But first and foremost, we got to go over today's Black History Fact. So today's Black History Fact is that 121 years ago today, James Weldon Johnson and his brother, John Johnson, Rosalind Johnson, composed the Black national anthem known as Lift Every Voice and Sing. That was 121 years ago today. So definitely wanted to give a shout out to our great ancestors and also make sure that we pay homage to that on this day, 121 years ago, they composed the Black national anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing. Also, as you all know, here at Lumumba Speaks, we believe in diversity of thought. So I have no issue with someone coming on and having a perspective that is different than my own. The only thing that I ask is what facts over feelings, that you do not engage in making patently false comments or statements, find it to be extremely problematic for a myriad of reasons. One, my platform, if I allow someone to come on my platform and disseminate information that is patently false, that hurts my credibility, right? And so I'm very big on making sure that if you take a particular perspective, it's rooted in factual information. As we all know, if you're on the wrong road, there's no way you're going to get to the right destination. So you can't make claims that are patently false. And then most importantly, you can't use any racial epithets of any kind in terms of describing or naming Black people. I don't allow that in any way, shape, or form. We here at Lumumba Speaks, we believe in the 3 N's of Black power, which of course, self-respect, self-defense, and of course, self-determination. We believe that we should first and foremost respect ourselves as an African people, respect ourselves as Black people, and as a result, we should not use racially disempowering, self-defeating, and self-destructive language when identifying or describing who and what we are in our people, irrespective of their geographical location. So that is some of the housekeeping that, of course, we always do. But we're going to turn the conversation towards, of course, toxic masculinity. So for those of you who may be unaware of toxic masculinity, many people associate toxic masculinity with, of course, feminism, right? However, toxic masculinity really came out of the mythopoetic men's movement, right? So this was a movement in which men typically told stories using poems, so on and so forth. And there was a belief that there were pressures placed upon a man to be violent, competitive, independent, so on and so forth, hence the term toxic. They argued that real or deep masculinity had lost touch. However, many of us know that when we look at gender studies, feminist discourse, and even, of course, in academia, which of course I work in, there has been a very strong push to promote this idea of toxic masculinity. Even in gender studies, there's a term known as hegemonic masculinity that argues that men believe that it is their responsibility or need or to be leaders, and of course, in society. So many people find it as an issue. I'm going to go ahead and put the link in the chat, and we're going to get the conversation started. The link should be in the description as well. But what are your thoughts on that? And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share my screen because I want everyone to be able to see this here some of the core characteristics that many argue is rooted in toxic masculinity. And I think it's rather ridiculous, but this is why we have a conversation. So let me pull this up here and we're going to get started. All right. Share my screen here. So, according to scholars, whatnot, they believe that these are some of the core traits or characteristics of toxic masculinity: aggression, being stoic, physical and mental toughness, emotional insensitivity, self-sufficiency, discrimination against everything that is not, I think they said, heterosexual. Some of the issues that I really take issue with is this whole idea of self-sufficiency. So if a man is being self-sufficient, then somehow he's being toxic. I think that's utterly ridiculous. Physical and mental toughness, the ability to be able to overcome and work through adverse situations rather than just falling apart. I think that's absolutely ridiculous. Being stoic, I think it's a positive thing. Being able to be in control of oneself, having self-discipline, imposed order, I think is a positive thing. Even aggression, right? There are times when you're going to need to be aggressive, when you're going to need to be assertive, when you're going to need to seize the initiative. So once again, I think this is extremely problematic. And then discrimination against everything that's not heterosexual. I don't know why that's in there. I think you could say the same thing for people who are homosexual. They discriminate against individuals who are heterosexual. So I think that that's a one-off. But definitely want to have a robust conversation regarding this concept of is toxic masculinity real? Get you all's perspective on these characteristics, these traits that many associate with toxic masculinity, and really have a robust conversation. I believe personally, if you take a look at what those traits are, this is completely nonsensical. I know oftentimes we hear many sisters complain about one of the major issues in the Black community is there aren't enough men stepping up and taking leadership positions. However, when you're engaging in sisters who have a feminist discourse, and this is just my personal anecdote, this is an anecdotal perspective, there tends to be a situation in which you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. And what I mean by that is if you take a leadership position, you're being toxic, you're being patriarchal, you're being controlling. But if you don't take a leadership position, it's because all of the men in the community are weak, and that as a result, Black women have to carry the burden and weight of the community on their shoulders. So we tend to find ourselves in a situation, the proverbial catch-22. So with that being said, definitely tap in. The link is in the chat. And we're going to have a conversation, hopefully a robust conversation, an intellectually stimulating conversation regarding these so-called toxic masculinity traits: aggression, stoicism, physical and mental toughness, emotional insensitivity, self-sufficiency. And then, of course, we'll do the one-off discrimination against everything that's not heterosexual, because I think for most people, the reality is if they're not into something, they're just not into it. I don't think that people go around discriminating. That's really rooted in bigotry and prejudice. But if someone is not into something, they're just not into it. So definitely tap in. Want to have a robust conversation. My personal perspective, I will reiterate, is I think that in all people, if you want to be successful in life, you're going to have times where you are aggressive, when you are assertive, when you seize the initiative, go for the gusto, as they say. If anyone watched the football game last night, I caught the tail end of it, but Alabama and LSU, they seized the initiative. They were aggressive. They were assertive. They went for the gusto, right? And as a result, they went for that 2-point conversion. After they scored a touchdown, they was able to win the game. They slayed the mythical dragon, as they say. Being stoic, I think this is another positive attribute of not only manhood and masculinity, but of being an adult. An adult, I've always taught my children that part of adolescence is learning how to control your emotions. We know that, unfortunately, for many of our people, if you fail to control yourself, someone else will. And what tends to happen, unfortunately, is that as a result of failing to control ourselves, we find ourselves in situations that I like to call adult timeout. An adult timeout typically is what the county, jail, or of course, someone's state prison. So I think Stoicism is extremely important. I think being even keel is a great example. It's very important. My supervisor, when we've had some conversations about me moving up to different levels professionally to a executive level, and one of the things he talked about was, hey, you need to be able to be stoic, right? And I I don't think that he's has exhibited any aspects of toxic masculinity. Number two, physical and mental toughness. I would even say mental toughness above the physical, right? Not everyone has to be an athlete or anything like that, but being able to be mentally tough, being able to overcome adversity, being able to, as we talk about this whole concept of the hero's journey arc, typically if you watch a superhero movie or even a swashbuckler film, what we tend to find is that the hero at some point faces adversity, where he's lost, he's got his ass kicked. Rocky 3, Rocky loses. Dark Knight Rises, Bane kicks Batman ass, breaks his back, right? And what tends to happen is they have to have the mental toughness to overcome that defeat, still believe in themselves, and then of course move forward and of course accomplish whatever goal they've set out to accomplish. We know that many years ago, Marcus Garvey taught us that if you lack confidence in self, you're twice defeated in the race of life. But if you have confidence, you have won the race before it has even begun. And part, I believe, of winning that race is being mentally tough. Marcus Garvey knew he had several enemies, but he persevered on, right? Malcolm X had several enemies. Yaa Santawa had several enemies. Mary Church Terrell, Mary McLeod Bethune, and the great line of divine that is, of course, Pan-African leaders know that they've all faced adversity, but we have to be mentally tough, right? Emotionally tough in order to move forward. This concept of emotional insensitivity, I disagree with. I think it's important that if you have a goal, you can't allow yourself to be easily moved by extraneous stimuli, right? So there are times where you're going to have to be able to suppress your emotions to move forward and be successful. There are times where you're going to have to decide and stand on your principles and not allow other people's emotions to move you off your square. And then last but not least, I think it's absolutely nonsensical to promote the idea that a man being economically self-sufficient, emotionally self-sufficient, intellectually self-sufficient, so on and so forth, is problematic. So those are my views when we look at these traits, so-called traits of toxic masculinity. I can recall maybe 6 years ago when I first became aware of this term and idea. My son was 9 at the time, and I can recall that his mother was like, oh yeah, I don't want him to be stoic. And I said, you out of your mind. And I remember telling him, come sit next to me, don't listen to her. Right. So I think we know as men that we are held to a different standard than women. I can recall my son and I, when he was younger, even though we still do this, we would always watch Forensic Files. And there was a episode where a man and a woman committed the same crime. The man got life, the woman got like 12 years and was released on parole in 8. And my son jumped up off the couch and was like, what? That's unbelievable. How could that happen? And I said, well, this is an example of the inequity when it comes to, of course, not only the criminal justice system from a gender lens, but also it shows you that men are held to a higher standard than women. Yes, there's talk of equality. We can believe that we're equal, but we know society and the institutions in society do not treat us as equal, right? And so I think that's something that we have to be cognizant of when we're having these conversations with young men, with young brothers. As I said before, working in higher ed, working in the academy, there is a very strong discourse regarding toxic masculinity, where I would argue that oftentimes they want men to engage in what is stereotypically seen as feminine female behaviors. But the link is in the chat. Tap in, be part of the conversation. As I stated before, facts over feelings, right? Facts over feelings. No racial epithets of any kind could be used when describing or discussing Black people. And then last but not least, just don't make any statements that are patently false. And we're good there. And I do accept diversity of thought. I think diversity of thought is very strong. I think it's important. I think it can help you solidify your stance or belief, or at the same time also help expose weaknesses in your argument and or your perspective that can allow you to make a shift based on what coming in contact with new information. So I am not opposed to diversity of thought. I'm not the type of person that says if you come on my channel, you come on my platform, you have to think and articulate what I do. I know oftentimes I may come off as didactic. I think that's just coming from a background of being an educator. However, I am not opposed to diversity of thought. So tap in. Once again, we can have a conversation about these different characteristics, or so-called characteristics, I say, regarding toxic masculinity: aggression, being stoic, stoicism, physical and mental toughness, emotional insensitivity, and of course, self-sufficiency. So tap in, be part of the conversation. I think this is really a myth. I think the reality of the situation is many individuals, particularly from a feminist standpoint, tend to want to put masculinity on the shelf and only use it when it's beneficial to them. So I would give an example. This is something we probably saw maybe in the last year, where there was this discourse going around, well, maybe a little more than a year ago, that Black men aren't protected. I'm sorry, Black women aren't protected. Black women aren't protected. Black women aren't protected. And really, in my opinion, this was a backhanded way of trying to insinuate that Black men weren't real men because Black men weren't protecting their women. Completely false. We know that there are documented cases of Black men not only protecting Black women, but putting their lives on the line and giving their lives, making the ultimate sacrifice to protect Black women. We know we've even seen situations where Black men have went to defend Black women's honor. And then as a result, they got cursed up by the very Black women that they were defending, right? But what tends to happen is we find, and particularly in Western discourse, where you can shit on Black men, you can, call Black men everything but a child of God, but then at the drop of a dime say, you know what, hey, now come over here and protect me. And what that really insinuates, in my opinion, is this concept of Black men really being an animal, a dog on a leash, right? Get on, boy, right? Rather than someone who was intellectual, analytical, and able to think for themselves. I oftentimes argue that when you talk to feminists, they tend to want a man from the neck down and not the neck up, right? Not someone who was able to think for themselves, but someone simply who was almost a robot that could be programmed to go out and do and say whatever they want. And I find that extremely problematic because, as you know, you are then cannon fodder. You're there to take all the shrapnel that society throws at us. And then when you're dead and gone, they step over you and take, of course, all of the praise and the adoration for whatever cause that you laid your life down for. So once again, I find it extremely problematic, but I think this is one of the practices of the enemy in which they teach us to engage in divide and conquer. But once again, we're looking to have a robust conversation regarding, is toxic masculinity real? I know it's a Sunday morning. Many people may just be waking up. But I think this is an important conversation to have because I think the reality of the situation is we won't get anywhere as a people if we're not strong. We know on both sides, male and female. We know traditionally, we look at some of the highest aspects of African culture, ancient and contemporary, there's a belief in duality, right? The divine male and the divine female. And I don't think we would get anywhere if we are echoing sentiments or even parroting sentiments, the one that typically comes from the oppressor, two, that actually seeks to dehumanize and create further strife and dissension amongst each other. So once again, the link is in the chat. Definitely would love to have a great conversation, a robust conversation, intellectually stimulating conversation regarding, is toxic masculinity real? And I will say this because, as I stated before, working in higher education, we know higher education is an industry that is dominated from a population standpoint by women, from a demographic standpoint by women. And I always tell them, most women would tell you that media baby, toxic masculinity is as real as toxic femininity. Neither are the norm. Tap in. I would love for you to really expound on what you mean by that. So if you can tap in, as you know, media baby, you do not have to cam up. Once again, you do not have to cam up. And of course, you don't even have to use your real name. You're using a pseudonym now. But I would love for you to tap in and, of course, really expound on what you mean by that. Media baby is stating that toxic masculinity is as well as toxic femininity. Neither are the norm. And if that is the case, and the question would be, why isn't toxic femininity, of course, talked about in the same manner as toxic masculinity? But as I was stating, higher education is, from a demographic standpoint, is an industry that's dominated by women. So I always tell sisters, says I'm cooking live hour, but maybe another day. Got you. I always state, well, if you all are experts on what's wrong with men, how about you change that with how you raise your sons? And they tend to do that. But the issue is they tend to raise their sons in a manner in which they're very passive. I've typically raised them in a manner of the type of man that they wish they would want. Someone who they believe that being a good man is doing whatever a woman wants, right? And so that then leads to a whole nother issue because they tend not to be assertive. They tend to be very passive. They tend to have a very beta male energy. They tend to engage in what Diddy, Puff Daddy, called back when he had the TV show Making the Band, bitch assness. It's just my opinion, right? But they are unable to handle adversity. They can't overcome any type of hardships. If things aren't smooth sailing, they fall apart. They become emotionally unstable, so on and so forth. I know men who behave that way, and it is just truly, truly disparaging to see that. I can't stand it. You don't like to be around it, right? I know I myself, I've faced many hardships in life. I've been incarcerated before. And I can remember I was in jail. And basically, typically you go to jail, you have a bond. Sometimes you don't. This situation, I didn't have a bond. It stated I had to wait to see the judge. And so that means I had to stay the weekend. I remember calling a brother and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to be in here for the weekend. And he's like, oh my God. I'm like, dude, like, the fuck, why are you so emotional? I'm the one sitting in here and I'm good. You know what I mean? So I think these are some issues that we have to look at. Hustler's instinct gives me the crowns with the, okay, very good, very good. Hope you could tap in, be part of the conversation regarding this concept of toxic masculinity. Is it real? But Media Baby says it is real, such as and same as toxic femininity are real, but neither are the norm. If that is true, I think one of the major issues is that many people are trying to articulate or promote a narrative that toxic masculinity is the norm, right? But if you go back and look at what I put up, the fact that they are arguing or trying to make a claim that being stoic, being assertive, aggressive when need to be, physical, being physically and mentally tough, emotionally insensitive, being self-sufficient is seen as a negative, I think it's completely nonsensical, right? So definitely tap in, be part of the conversation. As you all know, you do not have to cam up and you don't have to use your real name. You can use a pseudonym. But I think there's something that's very important because I think oftentimes what we find ourselves doing, particularly what is promoted in the media, is that we find Black men, unfortunately, oftentimes bending to the will of others, whether it be emotionally, so on and so forth. One of the things I did like was when the Emeka Mbuka situation took place, and Stephen A. Smith was talking about it. And the sister came on his show and was like, well, I'm going to stop you right there. And he said, hold on, this is my show. You're not going to stop me from doing anything, right? Andrews, I think is the sister's name. And so I think we have to have enough wherewithal, right, to stand on our square and, hey, if this is our position, I'm going to maintain that position, irrespective if you disagree, if you find it harmful, so on and so forth. Because oftentimes we find ourselves in situations, someone say, well, you made me do this or you made me feel that way. And I always tell sisters, I'm not responsible for how you feel, right? I didn't make you do anything, right? So I think we have to really stand on our square as men, particularly Black men. We know that we face a litany of issues in society in all areas of human activity. Shout out to the Queen Mother who wrote the ISIS papers, Frances Cress Welsing. But as a result, I think that we need to be stoic. There are times when we need to be assertive, where we go for the gusto, right? Or we hit it like a home run, as K. Michelle said, right? That we show the mental or physical toughness needed and necessary to be able to go into the so-called proverbial lion's den and come out with the victory in whatever field of endeavor that we are in. Shay, Black power, and at the same time, sometimes we're going to need to have skin like an armadillo. I tell people all the time I have skin like an armadillo. There have been times when I was working on my master's and I was taking courses with white supremacists in the classroom. And they were disseminating their rhetoric. Didn't bother me at all. In fact, I sat right next to them. And that made them uncomfortable. And I remember when I went on and I was working on my doctorate, and the sister was like, well, she wasn't a sister, but she was a woman, but she was Latinx. And she said, wow, like you were able to do that? You have thick skin. And I said, yeah, like an armadillo, right? We can't be in a situation where we're allowing what other people think, what other people feel to have an effect on who and what we are and how we move. We can't allow that to happen, right? One of my good brothers out of Columbus always let me know, hey, you shouldn't have any concern with what someone else is thinking, because they don't what he would always say is what they eat don't make you shit, right? What they think has no bearing on how you live your life and how you move. And I think part of the issue is many people are too concerned what is being said and what's taking place on social media. They care about what social media thinks of them. We know there's an idea and term called cyberbullying, where people are falling victim to cyberbullying and they're losing their minds and they're even unfortunately committing suicide. When the reality of the situation is where you could just block somebody. You could block someone on social media. You could block someone on email. You could block someone on YouTube. Right, so you don't have to succumb to these type of negative activities, right? So with that being said, like I said before, I'm gonna put the link back in the chat. I want some people to come on, tap in, be part of the conversation regarding, is toxic masculinity real? If so, what are some characteristics of toxic masculinity that one may think? I would think a characteristic that is toxic, irrespective if you're male or female, masculine or feminine, is using violence as a way to solve a problem. I was having a great conversation with a brother of mine. I actually was in my MPA program where he talked about it. You would believe there would be a belief that the older you get, the more refined you become, that you're able to solve problems without violence. And I agree with him wholeheartedly. And so I think that would be an example of someone who is toxic. I was having a conversation with a sister just the other day where she was talking about, sometimes I got to get loud. To me, that's toxic. You don't have to be loud to make a point, to be assertive, to stand on your square. To me, that's just someone who, of course, lacks the refinement necessary, lacks a sense of decorum necessary to engage in expressing what they think and how they feel in a healthy manner. That's a whole nother conversation we could have on being emotionally mature, emotionally stable, and emotionally healthy. So with that being said, I'll put the link in the chat. Love to get people's perspectives. If not, I'm going to log off because I know it is a Sunday morning and many people may not be looking to have a robust, intellectually stimulating conversation on a Sunday morning. But with that being said, I'm going to log out now. Until next time, y'all know what to do. Peace.